Today in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how to combine objects from different files, and I'm going to show you two different methods. So first, we do kind of need an object in our scene so that when we merge files, we can see how it interacts with those, because there's a couple things I want to point out. So we're going to just make a real quick object and apply a material to it. So I'm just going to make a sphere. I'm going to make it larger just so that it is closer in size to the stuff we're going to import. So let me set the radius up to something like 10. I'm going to put the height baseline all the way up, and we'll just leave those other settings. I'm also going to rename it to my sphere. And let's also apply a quick material to this. So you were provided with a texture for this one, so make sure that you do work with that. So I'm going to right click, assign new material. We're going to just do our Lambert. I'm going to rename this Lambert to just texture matte. And we're going to switch out that color for that image provided. So file, and let's locate that. And it's just this texture JPEG. It's that UV checker we've worked with before. And let's turn on visibility in our viewport. So we're not too concerned about what it looks like. Yeah, the unwrap is awful, but that's not our concern with this video today. All right, so I have two different files, and what I want to do is show you two different ways to put those files into here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about exporting them out. So the first way that we can import things from another file is we can directly just go to File, Import, and we can locate that Maya file. Be aware though that this is could be mildly messy depending on what is in that Maya file. So we're going to do that with this cylinder.ma. So let's import that in. And what it's going to do is, we're going to see over in the outliner, it names it kind of weird. It names it cylinder : my cylinder. And if I were to open up that Maya file, which I happen to have right here, you can see that the name of the file is cylinder and the object is named my cylinder. Right there. So when you do an import over directly from a Maya file, what it's going to do is import every single object in that Maya file and name it the name of the Maya file, and then the name of the object in the outliner. Sometimes this is fine, like if we're importing in over a single object, not too big of a deal. But if you only needed one object out of that file, like let's say there was 10 different objects over in that Maya file, it would import all of them into this file and give it this naming scheme. You know, again, one file, one object, not too bad, but if you have like a bigger, messier file, you might not want to do it this way. So I am going to go ahead and rename this because I don't really like it, since I don't need to know that it is from that file. And just rename it back to my cylinder. So that's one way to import. What if, you know, you had that file with lots of things in it and you wanted to just bring over the one file? So in order to do that, we will have to open up our other file and export out. So let's do that with our cube provided. There should be a file. Opening up mine right now. Let's see. There should be a Maya file provided called a cube. That is just a cube, and it's named my cube, and I want to export this out. The way I prefer to export things out, and this is probably just because I do a lot of exporting for games, is I do like to use the game exporter. I find this tends to work a little bit better. It tends to be, especially when you do start to end up exporting out multiple files, it's a lot quicker. Especially if you're also exporting multiple files into a game engine, constantly, it does work a little bit smoother. So the way to use this, first, we're going to select the objects in our scene that we want to export. So I'm going to select the cube because that's what I want to export out. I'm then going to open up the game exporter. A couple settings I always change because we don't want to export all. That's usually not what we want. I want to just export my selection. So I'm going to switch it to that. Next, underneath settings, I don't want to export it to a single file. Exporting one that makes, doesn't really matter. But again, this is really powerful for exporting out multiple things from your scene at once to, import over into a game engine. So I'm going to switch this over to export to multiple files. The last thing you need to set is the path, and this is where it's going to export to. So I'm going to locate my demo folder, and I'm going to use this as the directory. So what is it actually going to name these? It's going to name these based off of what it's named in the outliner. So when I export it out, it's going to just name this as an FBX. We're going to keep it on FBX. It's going to name it my cube. So that's, that's kind of why it's important to make sure you're naming stuff in your outliner. It makes things a lot easier when it comes to doing like exports and stuff like that, and also so you don't lose things. So this is all set up correctly. I'm just going to click export, and it's going to let me know if it was okay. One of the reasons I do like to use this ultimately, especially if I'm doing multiple objects, exporting to games, is unlike this window here, it stays up. So it's kind of its own little dialog box, and I tend to kind of keep this tucked away in a corner, usually on my second monitor. So as I'm working, I select my stuff, I can just kind of hit that export button. I don't have to hunt around. I know all my settings are correct. I don't have to reset anything. So, it is a little bit more efficient to use as an exporter. All right, I got that exported out. I'm going to go over to my main scene, and I'm going to import this. I'm going to go to File, Import, and locate that. The other way I can actually do this too is if I have my File Explorer, I can find that FBX, and I can just drop it, into my viewport. So if we just drag and drop FBXs into our viewport, it will import that into our scene. So now I have the my cube. So a couple of things I want to point out. Notice that it looks like I applied the same, texture in those scenes to those two objects, same as my sphere. So, it's using the same material. Not to the computer, and if we exported it out, not to the game engine. So notice if I click up on my sphere, the thing I created, remember I named that texture matte. My cylinder has a texture, and let me actually clear out its history so it'll be a little bit easier to find. Its texture is called cylinder because we exported it over, so it renamed it to be cylinder based on that file. The cube itself has a material called cube matte. So even though they look the same to our computer, to any program that we're working in, even though it's sharing the same texture, these are three different materials. We don't want that to happen because if we export this out to a game engine, we export it out to Substance Painter, it's going to treat it like 3 different materials, and that's not what we want. So we can either fix the material before we combine them, or we're going to have to fix them after. To fix it before, that's pretty easy. All you would do, and we'll do that for the cube, my cube, just know what material you want as the final material. So I do want it to be that texture matte. So I'm going to select my cube, right click on it and say assign existing material and switch it over. You know, I don't want the cube map. I don't want this one or that one. I'm looking for that texture matte that I had created for that sphere. So I'm going to assign texture matte. And we can see that it is now has texture matte, texture matte. These are now working with the same material. So let's combine these, but we will fix this cylinder after we combine it so that we can see that they are the same, you know, how to do that, how to fix it after the fact that you, oops, forgot. And now they're 2 different materials, even though they look the same. So first, let's combine them together. So I'm going to select all 3. I'm going to hold shift and click on combine because I want to figure out where I want that pivot point to be. I'm just going to put it on the world origin to make sure that, you know, that's easy to find, and click apply. And we now have our, naming it my sphere 1. We have all of our trash kind of left over, like our history. So I'm actually going to select everything and I'm going to delete its history so that we can get rid of it. And if it didn't get rid of that junk, after you do your delete history, feel free to just go ahead and delete that. Let's rename this to my objects. So let's take a look. If we go to the attribute editor, we can see that we have our 2 materials. Even though that's not really what I want, because if I were, again, to take this over to Substance Painter, it's going to treat it like 2 different unwraps, and we want it on 1 unwrap. So there's a couple different ways we can fix this. I am going to kind of show you a new menu. I don't think I've shown this. If I have, it was very briefly, and that is the hypergraph. That's this right here. It looks kind of like a blueberry. If we click on this, this is actually kind of, you know, a more detailed way to see and create materials. We don't go too far into this because, you know, ultimately we're not doing material creation too much in Maya, since this would ultimately go into a game engine or Sketchfab, and that's where we do our material creation. But we can fix our problems here. Notice up here at the top, this shows us all of the materials we have in our scene or that we've used. When you start importing things in, this is kind of a really good way to check to see if things are getting messy and what materials we actually have. We should probably clean this up a little bit. I tend to like to clean this up when I work with importing in things so that we can actually see what we have. So first, cube 1 cube matte. I think this might be from, you might not have this one. I was kind of testing out some stuff. So you might have a little bit less than me, but if you do, that's fine. One of the easiest ways to check to see if it's in the scene, have your display counter up like that. And what I'm going to do is have my face selection turned on. I'm going to right click on a material up here and say select objects with material. And you can see I'm actually got like a little bit of an error down there too. But notice that nothing is selected. So if I do select objects with material, it says, oh, nothing has that object. So what I can do is I can click on it and hit delete so that, you know, we're not actually using that material anywhere. I'm going to delete it. Let's see, cube matte Lambert, right click, select object with material. Again, this might just be some grossness because I was playing around in the scene, before the video, so I'm going to just delete this one. And we can also just double check to see that nothing in our scene is changing. Let's see, cube map Lambert. If I select object with material, we can see that that is not in our scene. This is probably the one that you have, because remember we switched that cube over to that texture. So I can go ahead and delete that now. I'm just selecting it and hitting delete on the keyboard. We're not using it anymore. We don't need to clutter up our hypershade. Okay, cylinder. If I right click, say select object with material, we can see that it is selecting the faces on that cylinder. And whoopsies, we don't want that on our object. We just want that texture matte. So we can easily select all of the faces that have the incorrect material on it. And then we can go ahead and reassign it. So I'm just going to right click, assign existing material, and put on that texture matte. I'm then going to deselect all those faces, and just to double check, I am going to go back to this cylinder, select object with material, and we can see we do not have anything left with that. So let me go ahead and delete that. Our final check that we can do is we can go over to, don't delete the Lambert one, the particle cloud one, and the standard surface one are kind of like the defaults that are always in a scene when you create it. So I usually just leave those alone. But this texture matte is the texture material that should be on everything now. So let me right click on it and select objects with material. And we can see that we are selecting now all of the tries in our scene. So we have the correct material assigned. So that means we have just one material on our objects. Oops, let me bring that up. So, this is all cleaned up. We have that selected, and we should be good to go now to export this out. We don't have to worry about importing these over into Substance Painter and it having like 3 or 4 different materials on it by accident. So one last thing, let's go ahead and practice using that game exporter one more time. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to make sure that it is set to export selection with my things selected. I'm going to change my settings over to export multiple files, even though, again, only exporting one thing out. But the nice thing about this too, even if you're exporting one thing out, it's just going to name it what it is named in your outliner. Let me change this to my demo folder. And I'm then going to just hit export. And then we are done exporting this. Export successful. Okay, so quick video, but lots of important information. It's important that you are being aware of what objects you are exporting, importing, and especially your materials. We don't want to import multiple materials unnecessarily over into Substance Painter, into our game engines, over into Sketchfab.